appreciate you all turning out for this discussion, and again, to harken back to Jackie's thought about trying to convene this kind of conversation and others like it. I'm very concerned about leadership development in the city and bringing a new generation of leaders into action, both as volunteers and later, I hope, as professionals in roles like some of us play now, and an elected office. So it's something that I deliberately want to encourage in my second tenure here in public office. Some of you may know I was a city commissioner for 10 years, from 92 to 2002, and I first ran for office in my mid-30s because I was concerned about growth. Because we've been through multiple waves of this, of course, over the years in the city. And I was a neighborhood association volunteer. I was working for the Home Builders Association, so I was getting immersed in growth and development issues from a professional capacity, but also in my own neighborhood. And eventually decided I'm going to take the plunge, quit my job, and run for city commissioner, and it worked out. But you don't necessarily have to go to that extreme in terms of getting involved, at least not initially. But I'm not just teasing, I'm really serious about that. And the hearing that Jackie, I think, was horrified by, and that I was too, that was sort of the proximate cause for this, was that we had a hearing on the West End plan before the city council, and a whole bunch of 60-plus folks testified, and about 3 people under 30 did. Maybe 3 people under 40, because they didn't obviously give their ages, but it was striking. And a lot of the people that testified were folks that were living on the 15th floor of a building that didn't want a 15-story building next door. And so it was, you know, a pretty serious outbreak of what planners sometimes call drawbridge syndrome, which is, I've got this great place, now stop! And that's an understandable impulse because we love this place, and many of us chose to move here from somewhere else. And I think it's obvious, but I'll state the obvious, which is that we get to decide as a community how we want to grow and try to shape policy and investment towards that. We don't really get to decide if we're going to grow. That's really already decided for us. We are going to grow. Unless we have an economic catastrophe that includes or is limited to Portland, where unemployment is 25 or 30%, and or something really terrible other than that goes wrong here, people are going to continue to choose to come here because in a country and an economy where talent and capital are mobile and where place matters, we win. And it's why Portland keeps coming out on top on all of these surveys of quality of life. And the Washington Post did one of the obligatory stories about Portland a little while ago, and the writer was particularly charmed by the fact that we converted what used to be a parking lot on the 4th Avenue side of City Hall into a plaza and vegetable gardens. And the title for her article was "Why Portland is Growing Its Own Swiss Chard and Stealing Your College Graduates." So that's kind of fun, but the point is, of course, that people are going to continue, talented people are going to continue to come here. And so the challenge for us is this is a very dynamic time in the history of the city. We're growing fast right now. Every indication is that growth is going to continue. We have about 270,000 households in the city right now. We're planning for another 120,000 in the comprehensive plan update that we're working on right now. So the next 6 months, Susan and our team were just going over the schedule. Literally the next 6 months, we're going to rewrite and revise the blueprint for how the city grows for the next 20 years. So if there was ever a time to get engaged, even more than you might already be, this next 6 months is pretty important. This is also a city where people are influential. You don't have to be part of an establishment. You don't even have to be part of an organization. You could create your own organization. You can show up and make a difference. And there have been some spectacular examples of that. I mean, the bicycle infrastructure we have here now is really the product of a handful of people, Rex Burkholder being one of them, who said, let's get organized and advocate for bikes in Portland. We were not a bike-friendly city 20 years ago when they first started working with then Commissioner Blumenauer and the city council. We didn't have a bike coordinator until Earl hired one. So we evolved quickly into a city that really thought about bikes because of a handful of advocates. Mark Lakeman and a few other folks that have been thinking creatively about public space came to me when I was transportation commissioner and said, we'd like to paint an intersection at 8th and Sherritt to demonstrate that we can create public space out of almost nothing with community engagement, paint, and some found materials architecture. And so they created Sherritt Square at 8th and Sherritt, and now there are dozens of those kinds of installations around the city, and we think differently about place and public space now because of that activism. So this really is a city where you can show up and make a difference. So that's why I'm glad that you're here and interested in having this conversation. The comp plan is literally now a draft map and a set of policies for how do we think the city's going to grow. A lot of that is going to continue to be focused along corridors, like the change that we've seen on Alberta and Vancouver Williams and Belmont and Division. There are other corridors where the change has hardly started yet, but we want it to. The most notorious of which, of course, is 82nd. Happened to be going to an event yesterday. We live in Eastmoreland, so we drove up Woodstock and took a left on 82nd and went all the way up to Fremont. You know, do that every now and then by bus. I wouldn't recommend 82nd by bike or by car, and just take a good look around. I mean, that strip of leftover highway commercial land is one of the most egregious in terms of poor outcome, and also maybe one of the most opportune in terms of massive underutilization of urban land that's otherwise reasonably well served by a lot of infrastructure. So that effort of trying to focus growth and change along those corridors, adding in transit where it's not yet there, so this Division, 82nd, Powell, bus rapid transit planning process that's underway now is something we're going to try to fast track, because we've obviously demonstrated that you can grow a lot of urban development with very favorable transportation ratios. Most people are walking, biking, taking transit around high capacity transit infrastructure. We proved that with the light rail system and with the streetcar. We'd like to prove it with bus rapid transit as well. So those planning projects are literally what's going to be occupying a lot of my attention and Susan's attention and the city's attention over the next year or thereabouts. Affordability is a huge challenge. I mean, several of you mentioned it. I think the critical question for Portland right now in this growth phase is what exactly do we need to do to avoid being San Francisco? What strategies do we put in place? Inclusionary zoning? Yes, we're asking the legislature for that authority. Incentive zoning that says you get this bonus in floor area ratio if you provide this many affordable units in your project? Yes, we're planning to do that. The city is investing $100 million in our budget this year in housing, most of it focused on affordable housing. Probably not enough. So there's a coalition working to, at the political level, to look at the idea of some kind of regional tax to pay for more affordable housing, to support the subsidy that's necessary to produce housing that most people can afford in a superheated real estate market. So those issues are very hot for us right now. Overall, as mayor, I would rather deal with the problems of growth and change and even the difficulties of gentrification than I would with the problems that cities had in the past of disinvestment and decline in lots of ways. When I was first elected city commissioner, there were 2,000 vacant and abandoned houses in North and Northeast Portland. Try to find one today. Some of you might be trying to find one today because you're going to buy it and fix it up. But Zach's trying to find one. But there were 2,000 vacant and abandoned houses just in North and Northeast. There was a community development corporation called HOST, which stood for Home Ownership a Street at a Time. They would buy a whole block of either derelict or empty lots and fix up the houses that remained and build houses in the interstices between them and sell them and then move on to the next block. They worked themselves out of business. HOST is gone because there's not that kind of resource anymore. Alberta Street has a few indigenous businesses, a lot of new ones, and all local firms. There's not, and now that the Pizza Hut at Alberta and MLK closed, every single business on Alberta Street is a local business. That's good, but it's also become, again, a gentrified, expensive street. So there are two edges to this sword, but again, I'd rather deal with an Alberta Street as it is today with its problems and opportunities, or a North and Northeast today with its problems and opportunities, than I would with the problems of decline and disinvestment. But there's no doubt there have been people who've been hurt by all this change. You know, people of color, people who are in the lower economic strata, immigrants, refugees, those folks are getting priced out of most of the Portland neighborhoods. You've seen the Coalition of Communities of Color report about the state of Black Oregon, or if you've looked at the demographic data that's come out about affordability of the city by census tract, it's a pretty daunting picture. So this is a best of times, worst of times economy for a lot of people in Portland, and that concerns me a great deal as mayor. In 1970, we had 3 census tracts in the city. Granted, the city was smaller then. We hadn't annexed all of East Portland. We had 3 census tracts where 30% of the population were below the poverty line. Today, we have 11. Even though we're this prosperous city with 4.8% unemployment and a booming economy, we have 11 census tracts where 30% of the people that live there are below the poverty line. And we have real challenges that come for a lot of our citizens because we are in that bifurcated 2 economy world, city, nation, and we represent those problems here too. So that's a quick dance, if you will, around some of the topics that I know you want to talk about, but I want to put those on the table. Look, we're looking for ideas on affordability, inclusion, development patterns, housing types, and design that will help shape that growth. How do we add 120,000 more dwelling units and households to this city, keep its soul, keep its character, and make it still be affordable to people? Those are the big challenges, and appreciate the chance to hear some of your thoughts about them. So who's not shy and wants to start?